Genghis Khan and the Making of the Modern World. Introduction. The Missing Conqueror. In 1937, the soul of Genghis Khan disappeared from the Buddhist monastery in central Mongolia along the River of the Moon, below the Black Shunk Mountains, where the faithful lamas had protected and venerated it for centuries. During the 1930s, Stalin's henchmen executed some 30,000 Mongols in a series of campaigns against their culture and religion. The troops ravaged one monastery after another, shot the monks, assaulted the nuns, broke the religious objects, looted the libraries, burned the scriptures, and demolished the temples. Reportedly, someone secretly rescued the embodiment of Genghis Khan's soul from the Shunka monastery and whisked it away for safekeeping to the capital in Ulaanbaatar, where it ultimately disappeared. Through the centuries, on the rolling, grassy steppes of Inner Asia, a warrior herder carried a spirit banner called a suld, constructed by tying strands of hair from his best stallions to the shaft of a spear just below its blade. Whenever he erected his camp, the warrior planted the spirit banner outside the entrance to proclaim his identity and to stand as his perpetual guardian. The spirit banner always remained in the open air beneath the eternal blue sky that the Mongols worshipped. As the strands of hair blew and tossed in the nearly constant breeze of the steppe, they captured the power of the wind, the sky, and the sun, and the banner channeled this power from nature to the warrior. The wind in the horsehair inspired the warrior's dreams and encouraged him to pursue his own destiny. The streaming and twisting of the horsehair in the wind beckoned the owner ever onward, luring him away from his spot to seek another, to find better pasture, to explore new opportunities and adventures, to create his own fate in his life in this world. The union between the man and his spirit banner grew so intertwined that when he died, the warrior spirit was said to reside forever in those tufts of horsehair. While the warrior lived, the horsehair banner carried his destiny. In death, it became his soul. The physical body was quickly abandoned to nature, but the soul lived on forever in those tufts of horsehair to inspire future generations. Genghis Khan had made one banner made from white horses to use in peacetime and one from black horses for guidance in war. The white one disappeared early in history, but the black one survived as the repository of his soul. In the centuries after his death, the Mongol people continued to honor the banner where his soul resided. In the 16th century, one of his descendants, the Lama Zanabazar, built the monastery with a special mission to fly and protect his banner. Through storms and blizzards, invasions and civil wars, more than 1,000 monks of the Yellow Hat sect of Tibetan Buddhism guarded the great banner, but they proved no match for the totalitarian politics of the 20th century. The monks were killed and the spirit banner disappeared. Fate did not hand Genghis Khan his destiny. He made it for himself. It seemed highly unlikely that he would ever have enough horses to create a spinet banner, much less that he might follow it across the world. The boy who became Genghis Khan grew up in a world of excessive tribal violence, including murder, kidnapping, and enslavement. As the son in an outcast family left to die on the steppes, he probably encountered no more than few hundred people in his entire childhood, and he received no formal education. From this harsh setting, he learned in dreadful detail the full range of human emotion, desire, ambition, and cruelty. While still a child, he killed his older half-brother, was captured and enslaved by a rival clan, and managed to escape from his captors. Under such horrific conditions, the boy showed an instinct for survival and self-preservation, but he showed little promise of the achievements he would one day make. As a child, he feared dogs and he cried easily. His younger brother was stronger than he was, and a better archer and wrestler. His half-brother bossed him around and picked on him. Yet from these degraded circumstances of hunger, humiliation, kidnapping, and slavery, he began the long climb to power. Before reaching puberty, he already formed the two most important relationships of his life. He swore eternal friendship and allegiance to a slightly older boy who became the closest friend of his youth, but turned into the most dedicated enemy of his adulthood. And he found the girl whom he would love forever and whom he made the mother of emperors. The dual capacity for friendship and enmity forged in Genghis Khan's youth endured throughout his life and became the defining trait of his character. The tormenting questions of love and paternity that arose beneath a shared blanket or in the flickering firelight of the family hearth became projected onto the larger stage of world history. His personal goals, desires, and fears engulfed the world. Year by year, he gradually defeated everyone more powerful than he was, until he had conquered every tribe on the Mongolian steppe. At the age of 50, when most great conquerors had already put their fighting days behind them, Genghis Khan's spirit banner beckoned him out of his remote homeland to confront the armies of the civilized people who had harassed and enslaved the nomadic tribes for centuries. In the remaining years of his life, he followed that spirit banner to repeated victory across the Gobi and the Yellow River, into the kingdoms of China, through the Central Asian lands of the Turks and the Persians, and across the mountains of Afghanistan to the Indus River. In conquest after conquest, the Mongol army transformed warfare into an intercontinental affair, fought on multiple fronts stretching across thousands of miles. Genghis Khan's innovative fighting techniques made the heavily armored knights of medieval Europe obsolete, replacing them with disciplined cavalry moving in coordinated units. Rather than relying on defensive fortifications, he made brilliant use of speed and surprise on the battlefield, as well as perfecting siege warfare to such a degree that he ended the era of walled cities. Genghis Khan taught his people not only to fight across incredible distances, but to sustain their campaign over years, decades, and eventually more than 3 generations of constant fighting. In 25 years, the Mongol army subjugated more lands and people than the Romans had conquered in 400 years. Genghis Khan, together with his sons and grandsons, conquered the most densely populated civilizations of the 13th century. Whether measured by the total number of people defeated, the sum of the countries annexed, or the total area occupied, Genghis Khan conquered more than twice as much as any other man in history. The hooves of the Mongol warriors' horses splashed in the waters of every river and lake from the Pacific Ocean to the Mediterranean Sea. At its zenith, the empire covered between 11 and 12 million contiguous square miles, an area about the size of the African continent, and considerably larger than North America, including the United States, Canada, Mexico, Central America, and the islands of the Caribbean combined. It stretched from the snowy tundra of Siberia to the hot plains of India, from the rice paddies of Vietnam to the white fields of Hungary. and from Korea to the Balkans. The majority of people today live in countries conquered by the Mongols. On the modern map, Genghis Khan's conquests include 30 countries with well over 3 billion people. The most astonishing aspect of this achievement is that the entire Mongol tribe under him numbered around a million, smaller than the workforce of some modern corporations. From this million, he recruited his army, which was comprised of no more than 100,000 warriors, a group that could comfortably fit into the larger sports stadiums of the modern era. In American terms, the accomplishment of Genghis Khan might be understood if the United States, instead of being created by a group of educated merchants or wealthy planters, had been founded by one of its illiterate slaves, who, by the sheer force of personality, charisma, and determination, liberated America from foreign rule, united the people, created an alphabet, wrote the Constitution, established universal religious freedom, invented a new system of warfare, marched an army from Canada to Brazil, and opened roads of commerce in a free trade zone that stretched across the continents. On every level and form and from any perspective, the scale and scope of Genghis Khan's accomplishments challenged the limits of imagination and taxed the resources of scholarly explanation. As Genghis Khan's cavalry charged across the 13th century, he redrew the boundaries of the world. His architecture was not in stone but in nations. Unsatisfied with the vast number of little kingdoms, Genghis Khan consolidated smaller countries into larger ones. In Eastern Europe, the Mongols united a dozen Slavic principalities and cities into one large Russian state. In Eastern Asia, over a span of 3 generations, they created the country of China by weaving together the remnants of the Song dynasty in the south with the lands of the Jurchid in Manchuria, Tibet in the west, the Tangut kingdom adjacent to the Gobi, and the Uyghur lands of eastern Turkestan. As the Mongols expanded their rule, they created countries such as Korea and India that have survived to modern times in approximately the same borders fashioned by their Mongol conquerors. Genghis Khan's empire connected and amalgamated the many civilizations around him into a new world order. At the time of his birth in 1162, the Old World consisted of a series of regional civilizations, each of which could claim virtually no knowledge of any civilization beyond its closest neighbor. No one in China had heard of Europe, and no one in Europe had heard of China, and, so far as is known, no person had made the journey from one to the other. By the time of his death in 1227, he had connected them with diplomatic and commercial contacts that still remain unbroken. As he smashed the feudal system of aristocratic privilege and birth, he built a new and unique system based on individual merit, loyalty, and achievement. He took the disjointed and languorous trading towns along the Silk Route and organized them into history's largest free trade zone. He lowered taxes for everyone and abolished them altogether for doctors, teachers, priests, and educational institutions. He established a regular census and created the first international postal system. His was not an empire that hoarded wealth and treasure. Instead, he widely distributed the goods and acquired in combat so that they could make their way back into commercial circulation. He created an international law and recognized the ultimate supreme law of the eternal blue sky over all people. At a time when most rulers considered themselves to be above the law, Genghis Khan insisted on laws holding rulers as equally accountable as the lowest herder. He granted religious freedom within his realms, though he demanded total loyalty from conquered subjects of all religions. He insisted on the rule of law and abolished torture but he mounted major campaigns to seek out and kill raiding bandits and terrorist assassins. He refused to hold hostages and instead instituted the novel practice of granting diplomatic immunity for all ambassadors and envoys, including those from hostile nations with whom he was at war. Genghis Khan left his empire with such a firm foundation that it continued growing for another 150 years. Then, in the centuries that followed its collapse, his descendants continued to rule a variety of smaller empires and larger countries, from Russia, Turkey, and China to India and Persia. They held an eclectic assortment of titles, including Khan, Emperor, Sultan, King, Shah, Emir, and the Dalai Lama. Vestiges of his empire remained under the rule of his descendants for 7 centuries. As the Mughals, some of them reigned in India until 1857, when the British drove out Emperor Bahadur Shah II and chopped off the heads of two of his sons and his grandson. Genghis Khan's last ruling descendant, Alim Khan, Emir of Bukhaira, remained in power in Uzbekistan until deposed in 1920 by the rising tide of Soviet